I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going on with the ACC this year, so we'll see if our next guest has any clue what's going on with this league, or if it's possible to have any clue what's going on with this league right now as we bring in our friend Andrea Adelson from ESPN. All right, Andrea, you got any idea what's going on with this league right now? We're only a week in, and I feel like I got no idea which way to look or what's coming from anywhere right now.
I think we're in the upside down right now. Nothing really makes sense, right? On paper, everyone thought Florida State, Clemson, Virginia Tech, those teams might have a chance to contend. Oh, yeah. Not great, Bob, as the meme goes. Miami, right? Like, we've been waiting how long for Miami? Suddenly Miami looks really good. And I think people maybe thought, okay, they've got a chance, but certainly they look at least through 1 week like maybe they can finally be, quote-unquote, back, and I hate using that word because we've used it a lot with Miami. We'll see as the season progresses, but certainly a lot of surprising results, including Georgia Tech, Syracuse's opponent tomorrow, Boston College, what they did to Florida State. Lots of surprises in the first 2 weeks, and I did not have on my bingo card that Florida State was going to start 0-2 this season. And
no, you do not want to be 0-2, certainly not after week 1, which is where Florida State is right now. And both league losses, go figure. And obviously we're making big sweeping generalizations after 1 week because so many weird things have happened. What do you think's more likely here, Andrea? That, like, on one hand, are we about to have like a crazy, wild season of the ACC where we don't know what's up all season long? Or the other hand, is it like, okay, we've only seen one game, and the same teams that we expected preseason are going to rise to the top?
I thought going into the year that this was the most wide open the ACC had been in probably a decade or so, because I felt like teams had basically risen up and Clemson had fallen back a peg enough for there to be some parity at the top. I didn't have Florida State as my ACC champion this year, and I didn't have Clemson either. I picked Miami preseason. It's only been 1 week, but I just felt like Clemson has kind of taken a little bit of a step back. I thought Florida State would take a step back without all of the players that they lost to the NFL draft. I thought there would be not just a personnel drop-off, but a leadership drop-off, and we've seen that maybe more so than I expected right out of the gate. But certainly I thought those two teams would kind of come back to the field and others would rise up, including Miami. But I do think that Clemson is going to probably be in the mix. I think Georgia would probably do that to just about any team in the country, what they did to Clemson week 1. I think Florida State's probably out of it. I'm ready to declare they're probably out at 0-2 in ACC play. I just don't see how they're going to get themselves together to make a run. If I'm wrong, have me on here, freezing cold takes, and I'm happy to eat it at the end of the season. But I've kind of readjusted where I feel like Florida State is right now based on the first 2 games. So I still feel like it's wide open. I think Miami probably has emerged as more of a favorite than what I thought headed into the year. But otherwise, I think there's a lot of teams that we were not talking about in the preseason, like a Georgia Tech, like a Boston College, maybe that could potentially make a run. We'll see how NC State does this weekend against Tennessee. I'm kind of leaving the door open there to see what this team looks like on a national stage in a non-conference game that they pretty much have to win, I think, for their own narrative's sake and for the ACC as well. North Carolina, obviously, their starting quarterback's out. We'll see how Connor Harrell does. So I feel like and Syracuse, they can get their defense together. With the way their schedule plays out, they could find themselves in the mix. So there's a lot of teams. Louisville, I haven't even mentioned Louisville. We'll see how they play once they get to a actual like FBS playing team, elite FBS playing team. But certainly, I thought it would be wide open, and I still think it's going to be fairly wide open.
You said a word in there, Andrea, which I found very important so far, is the word narrative, right? Especially, like, the ACC has been, like, stuck in bad narrative land for a long time here, and this last week certainly didn't help, right? Because people look at the ACC, and the first teams they look at are Florida State and Clemson. Last couple weeks happen and the whole league gets dumped on. What's your view here, national perspective, where it seems like the nation doesn't care that the league might actually be really interesting this year just because of the whole narrative going on and the lawsuits and all this stuff that's big picture?
Yeah, you're right. The losses in the first couple of weeks and Virginia Tech losing to Vanderbilt certainly does not help, because it's not just the Florida State and Clemson, right? If people are thinking about the ACC, they're thinking about those two teams, Miami and Virginia Tech, right out of the gate. Those four need to be good. I mean, we've said this for years and years. And so when you have Virginia Tech losing to perennial SEC doormat Vanderbilt. Although, by the way, their transfer quarterback, who played lights out last year, looks awesome, and maybe he could be a difference maker for them. We'll see. It's not good when your defending champ loses the way that they did on national TV with the spotlight only on them for 2 straight weeks. When Clemson, who's made more playoff appearances than any other ACC team, gets blown out like that, Virginia Tech, obviously, Miami, the one saving grace in the conference. I think the narrative is more important than ever this year because of the 12-team playoff, right? Because the ACC doesn't want just their champion in, which is a guarantee, right? Whomever wins the ACC is in no matter what. The ACC wants more than one, especially because they know the SEC is going to get 3 to 4 to 5. The Big Ten is going to get 3 to 4 to 5, depending on how this whole thing plays out. And they're also in a narrative competition with the Big 12 that has talked a big game for the entire offseason. And so when you start out like that, opinions get set or reinforced right out of the gate. And so that could potentially color people's view come November when the ACC is going to be out there publicly politicking to get more than one team into the playoffs. What is that going to look like if they fall flat on their face in non-conference play, particularly the teams that are supposed to be the flag bearers for the conference? So you're right. It was not great for the ACC. There's still opportunities here this weekend, next weekend, to kind of shift it a little bit. But they need Clemson to bounce back and be good. And they certainly need Florida State to figure out how to fix things and move forward and try to make a run.
Yeah, the Big 12 certainly understood they were in a narrative battle before the ACC did. That is for darn sure, because they've been doing that for years. Because you look at the way I think people finally started to understand this, like people, a 12-team playoff, that's cool. It feels like in the last few weeks, more people have noticed how the bracket sets up, right? Like if you're the ACC and your champion ends up the 4 seed, like there's a good chance like the ACC gets one team in and all of a sudden you're playing either the second best team in the SEC or the Big Ten in the quarters, and you get smoked and the league's gone. Like in the playoffs, like that could happen to either the ACC or the Big 12 this year.
Yeah, it really could. And I knew that once the season started, the playoff format would, I think, be more visible in people's minds, right? When we're sitting here going through an off-season, you're like, 12-team playoff, 12-team playoff. Not really looking at a bracket. But now, with a 12-team playoff, you've got bracketology for college football, right? You've got everybody making their projections and putting it in a bracket just like it's the basketball tournament. So you can see it right there in front of your face, and it's like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that's the way it was going to look. Yikes, right? And so you're absolutely right. There could be some potential nightmare scenarios for the ACC depending on how this whole thing plays out. Of course, they could try and hang their hat on Miami, let go Miami, go undefeated Miami, and then you don't maybe potentially have to worry about what that looks like as a 4 seed. But the chances of Miami going undefeated, not sure what they are. I'd love to ask our folks at the Stats and Info group. They've got a nice schedule that sets up well for them as well, but they can't just get too high the way that they have in years past. They get a big win, and they can't handle the emotion coming off of that. We'll see how Miami handles now everybody looking at them, talking about them, even more than usual. Yeah,
because we know the Miami is back narrative that's out there. But that said, like if they do it, the country at least is historically is willing to accept Miami being good. So that's a whole different ball of wax. So we got Andrea Adelson, ESPN ACC reporter, with us. Your colleague David Hale wrote earlier this week on the Dabo Clemson, like what's going on there. What do you make of Clemson? Like obviously Clemson, I think got good in many ways, right? Because Dabo's really stubborn in his convictions. How stubborn is he going to stay in these convictions now, Andrea, now that they're not working as well anymore?
Well, I appreciate you mentioning David Hale's article. David has been following this program closer than anybody else from a national perspective, and I thought that he had a really good, strong, nuanced story that isn't just a bunch of hot takes or knee-jerk reactions to Dabo and a quote or the way that he's run the program. The two of us have been around the program long enough to understand that while Dabo has taken a lot of heat and criticism for how he wants to use the portal, the bigger issue is that they're not developing players the way that they were when they were going on this 6-year playoff run. Would using the portal help? Sure. But the flip side of that is right now, Florida State is getting criticized for relying too much on the transfer portal with their 0-2 start, right? That they've just relied on it too much. They haven't been able to build a foundation, and this is what happens when you turn over your roster year after year. That's what people are saying about Florida State. It's the complete opposite of what Dabo has tried to do. But the fact of the matter is they hit on 2 generational quarterbacks back-to-back in Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. The next 2 guys, not generational, and they were misses. And so when you go from Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence from elite quarterback play to good to average quarterback play, your team is going to suffer. That's one, the quarterback position. The other position is wide receiver. Yeah. They aren't developing the players at wide receiver that they had during that 6-year playoff run. And even at the end of the playoff run, they had Justin Ross. But beyond him, they had to rely on some slot guys to be able to make some of the explosive plays to them down the field. If you look at what receiver has been for them over the last 4 years, they've hung on to guys that haven't developed because Dabo believes in them. Dabo is an optimist, and he believes another year and they'll get it, right? Like, he has seen players on his team develop late, whether it was a Vic Beasley, whether it was a Grady Jarrett on defense. Same thing for some players that they had on their offensive line who maybe blossomed later in their career. Maybe some receivers who blossomed a little bit late, right? So Dabo doesn't want to give up on guys. Okay, that loyalty is a great quality to have, except when it's been 3 years and you're getting no production out of your receivers, there's questions about, well, how much longer do you hang on to them? And does the portal now come into play where you can at least get maybe a playmaker who can help you on offense? And the offensive line has been an issue for them even during their playoff run, right? They've never had the best offensive line in the ACC. They were just so good at quarterback, running back, and receiver at those skill positions that they essentially out-talented people. It wasn't even the scheme. They were just better than everybody based on their talent. And while they still have probably the most talented rosters in the league, they don't have the best quarterback anymore. And they certainly don't have the best receivers anymore. And when that happens, the rest of your team suffers. Your defense, which should still be elite, is suffering. You can't sustain drives. And what happens against Georgia happens. So to me, the portal is a part of it, but Dabo's never going to go in and get 15 guys out of the portal and remake his roster. He's just not going to do that. He wants to be able to develop his guys. They just haven't developed them at the rate that they did in that 6-year playoff run.
No, I mean, the 2018 title, like fourth down and 17 or whatever it was, T. Higgins, he made a play against Syracuse, and then they go and win out the rest of the way and win that championship with Trevor Lawrence. All right, last thing here for Andrea Adelson. I know you wrote about Fran Brown back in the spring, kind of the early days of him getting it going. What's it been like for you to watch this guy operate up here at Syracuse, Andrea? And what are your expectations here? Because this is all kind of interesting and new to watch him go about his business here this year.
Yeah, it has been. I think it's been refreshing. To be honest. Now, the defensive performances I alluded to before, obviously it needs to get better, especially with Georgia Tech now coming in. But, boy, the talent that is there on the offense this season, if everyone can stay healthy, all of the different playmakers that McCord was able to get the ball to in the opening. And, again, I know it's Ohio. Try not to, make too much out of what happened in the first game. But I love the way he was able to distribute the ball, the balance with the running backs. I think the offensive line played pretty well, all things considered, for an opening game. If that can continue and develop throughout the course of the season, if the defense can make some strides up front, then I think Syracuse is going to have a chance to be in the mix. I picked them as a bowl team preseason. Their schedule, sets up fairly nicely for them, I think. But I think everything we thought Syracuse was going to look like on offense played itself out. And it's week one. I don't want to make too many knee-jerk reactions, but the enthusiasm of the crowd, I think it's a near sellout on Saturday or close to it. You can correct me if I'm wrong there. The enthusiasm of the folks coming out, the fact that Fran wants to win so badly for the community, for the players, to prove himself as a guy who had been overlooked in a lot of ways as a head coach. He thought he'd get an opportunity at Temple. They didn't even call. That hurt him a lot. And so I think that has proven to be a motivator for him headed into this season. He doesn't want to leave any stone unturned. He's going to give his all for this program. So we'll see how it plays out. I expect tomorrow to be a really competitive game. And I'm excited to see what happens the rest of the way. But certainly I think there's an energy, enthusiasm, optimism around this program that hasn't been there in quite some time.
Yeah, that's a fact. It's been a shot in the arm here in the last 9-10 months or so. Last I heard, Andrea, it sounds like they're north of 40 for the game tomorrow. I don't know if they'll quite push it all the way to a sellout, but should be a great crowd in the Dome. And I think it's going to be a fun game, so we look forward to that.
Good.
All right, Andrea, always great to chat. It's going to be a wild season in this league, it feels like. I'm sure we'll catch up again before things are all said and done, but thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me again. Appreciate it.
There she is, Andrea Adelson. Make sure to check her, David Hale out. Their great coverage of the ACC all over the ESPN and ACC network, various platforms all over the place. With that, we'll take a break. When we come back, we will get Mike in here. It's our first NFL weekend. What does that mean? It means our NFL whip around on the 411. That's next. Q Sports Talk, ESPN Radio.